So hi, everyone, and welcome to the Accord webinar. My name is Will Roseno, and I'm a computational scientist at UVA, and I'm also the Accord project manager. And today we're going to be talking about Accord, giving you a brief overview and an idea of the services that we provide. So in the age of big data and data-driven research, data means something different to pretty much everyone. I'm a bioinformaticist by training, so I spend a lot of time looking at spreadsheets, reading in data, exporting data. But other researchers think of data in the form of text and text processing. Some researchers think of it through images and image processing. And pretty much all researchers use data of different file types in some way, shape, or form. Now, in today's research climate, it's generally true that more data is better, which also means that there's an increasing need to protect the data. However, data-driven research is rapidly getting too big for our laptops. So I mentioned that I do a lot of bioinformatics research, and I do a lot of single cell analysis. And those scripts have gotten much too large for me to run on my own computer. Therefore, it forces me to use something like a high-performance cluster. And that's where research computing comes in. So research computing organizations aim to empower researchers by utilizing data-driven approaches on a much larger scale. So think of some analysis that a researcher needs to run, and they run out of memory on their own computer. They can go to research computing, who has essentially a bunch of computers tied together through some sort of hardware, creating a supercomputer of some sorts. And that cluster has much more processing speed and much more memory. So things that they couldn't do on their own laptop, they can then run on a cluster. So what type of data can be analyzed on a high performance cluster? So we generally break data down into two distinct zones or bins. So we have our standard security zone for data, and then we have our high security zone for data. Our standard security zone is de-identified data or traditional non-sensitive data. So if you think of a group of individuals that you have data on and you don't have their names or their addresses or their phone numbers or any other identifiable piece of information, that would be traditional de-identified data and could be stored in the standard security zone. Now, typically only larger schools across the US have their own standard security zone shared high performance cluster. But now all of a sudden, let's say that you want to store their addresses. That makes the data identifiable, and therefore you have to move the data to a high security zone. So if you have any type of identifiable information like HIPAA or ITAR or FERPA or anything like that, you have to move that data to a high security zone. And very few schools have their own high security zone shared high performance clusters. So what happens when more and more data moves to the high security zone? Because we live in the age of big data, we're collecting data at an unprecedented rate, and data is becoming more and more granular in the observations that we store. And so when we have to move all of this data to a secure environment, a lot of the schools don't have infrastructure or personnel to support the highly sensitive data. And this severely limits research involving population-centric data like PII, personal identifiable information, and FERPA data. It limits research involving ITAR, and it's even increasingly limiting research involving bioinformatics. I work with researchers daily who talk about, as we get more and more granular with these observations, at some point, it's probably going to have to move to a high security zone. Now, even like at UVA, that we do have a high security zone, even if a school has a high security zone, collaborations typically involve sponsoring accounts for outside users. So let's say a researcher at UVA is doing research and wants to collaborate with somebody outside the university. They would typically have to sponsor an account for that researcher. That researcher might have to undergo a background check, and there'd be paperwork to fill out. So it's quite an involved process. So what happens in today's age when we have more and more data, the data is becoming highly sensitive, and we want to encourage collaborations across universities? That's where Accord comes in. Accord, or Assuring Controls Compliance of Research Data, is a web accessible, secure platform which allows researchers from different colleges and universities to analyze and store their sensitive data in a central location. Now, there are a bunch of goals of Accord, but the primary ones are that Accord is designed to encourage collaborative research partnerships across institutions by managing the risks associated with sensitive data sharing. So one way that we do this is that we've created a membership agreement that is signed between the UVA, the home institution, and then the researcher's home institution. Accord also gives researchers from different colleges and universities access to a community computing system capable of processing and storing sensitive data. Now, this is especially important for schools that lack the critical mass of researchers to invest in staffing or technical resources for such systems. And Accord supports individual researchers regardless of the size of the university. I know that there are resources out there like NSF-sponsored clusters, like TAC and things like that, but a lot of times they require a lot of data. You have to go through all this approval process. Accord is designed to support individual researchers who just want to collaborate and store their sensitive data. So what type of data can be stored on Accord? Accord supports de-identified PII, or personally identifiable information, FERPA data, business confidential, and other types of sensitive data. Accord does not support CUI, FSMA, or PCI data. Probably the biggest perk to Accord is that thanks to the NSF, Accord is a free service to researchers in the United States. And here is a link to our abstract and award information that I'll send out with the slides afterwards in case you want to check that out. So now that we get the idea of the need for Accord, how does Accord actually work? Accord is project-based, which means that investigators request access to the platform. Once they have access, they can invite co-investigators, again, from multiple institutions. They can store their data of up to 1 terabyte and even beyond 1 terabyte. And they can use application-based computing environments. And as of now, we have RStudio, Jupyter Lab, and Thea Python up and running on Accord, with more to be added in the coming months and even more to be added in the coming years. Now, typically, if you are working at your home institution and you have a researcher who comes up to you and says, I have heard about this cool new resource, Accord, and you say, of course, Accord's great. And then you say, well, we've got a couple of different things to check before you get access. So the first is we like to include these decision trees. The first is whether or not Accord is right for me. So the researcher has to confirm whether or not they have de-identified health information, student information, business confidential information, or other potentially sensitive information. If their data falls into one of those categories, then the next step is to check the institutional membership. And like I mentioned before, one of the ways that we mitigate risks involving data sharing is we have a membership agreement between UVA and the researcher's home institution. So the next step would be to check if your home institution is an Accord member. And if you're the first researcher at your university, you will request an Accord membership agreement. The institution or your home institution will then sign the membership agreement, and then we will approve it, sign it on our end, and the researcher will be able to access or request access to Accord. Now, the best part about these membership agreements is that they only need to be signed once. So let's say you're the second researcher at your university, and the first researcher has already signed the agreement. You don't have to worry about that, and you can immediately request access to Accord. Once you're able to request access, all we need from you is a simple web form with your project description and the data that you're bringing along. And then you wait for project approval, which will be pretty quick because I'm approving those. And then finally, you can complete the onboarding training and setup, and you can start using Accord. So now that we have an idea of what Accord is used for and the platform itself, let's get an idea of what the platform actually looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and ask Ravi to share his screen, if you don't mind, Ravi. Great. And we're going to treat Ravi as a new user. So let's say Ravi's just gotten access to Accord. His project has been approved and he wants to log into the system. So he's going to go to our portal, accord-dev.uvarc.io. And it is going to bring up his sign-in process. Now you're able to sign in through InCommon. And if your university does not use InCommon, we are able to sponsor an account through UVA. So you'll still be able to use this process. So he'll type in Virginia as his home organization. And it should come up with the University of Virginia. And he'll be able to hit select, and that will automatically redirect him to our login page. So here he'll enter his UVA credentials, his net badge and ID. Then it'll ask for some sort of dual authentication. Here he's getting a push message. And voila, he is now signed into the Accord platform. So let's say we want to start a session for data management. So he wants to launch one of those 3 applications that I mentioned earlier. He can click on Start a New Session up at the top. He's able to select the project that he belongs to. And then he's able to launch any session. So let's go ahead and launch an RStudio session. So it'll take you back to the main page. And while it's waiting for resources, it'll spin up the environment. This one was really quick, so you can hit connect. And it will open up RStudio in a separate tab here. And now he is running RStudio on Accord, so he has access to his project environment where he can store up to 1 terabyte of his data or even more if he needs it. Here we have an example R script just stored on here just to show you for a demo. So Robbie, you can go ahead and run the script. Great. And this script is just printing a Fibonacci sequence. And as you can see, it printed a Fibonacci sequence of up to 15 terms. All right, great. Thank you, Robbie. So once Robbie's done with his groundbreaking work on Fibonacci sequences, he can hit terminate. And that will terminate this session that he was currently running. And so after it successfully terminates, it will move from the current session down below into his recent sessions. And the nice thing about these recent sessions is instead of going through and starting a new session and clicking the project that you want access to, you can go down and look at your recent sessions. So there he has some in Jupyter Python, and he can just go ahead and click launch down below, and that will launch a Jupyter Lab session. You don't have to do that right now. Well, sounds good. Thank you, Robbie. Might as well. Yeah, we can connect to Jupyter Lab. Great. All right, awesome. And that will pull up a Jupyter notebook, and he'll be able to select Python and then, run his scripts from there. All right, thank you, Robbie. I think that is all we had for the demo. I appreciate it. Then we just have a couple last slides. So I'm going to take back screen sharing. Okay. Great. So in summary, not every school has dedicated research computing support. Like I mentioned, a lot of schools don't have their own cluster, and even fewer have their own high security cluster. So in order to reach researchers across various institutions, libraries are an ideal way to bridge the gap between Accord and the research community at each institution, because y'all existed a long time before research computing ever did. And anytime people have questions about their research or needed materials or platforms, they often come to libraries. So we figured it would be a great place for some sort of outreach. So we ask as a next step that if you're interested in the system and it sounds like it might be a good fit for your university, we'd like you to onboard yourself to Accord. So here, after the webinar is over, I'm going to edit the video and post the link so people have access to this recording along with the slides. So you have some reference material if you want. We've created LibGuides here at UVA that we're happy to provide as well in case you want to post a LibGuide. And then we'd love to onboard you. So we'd get a membership agreement signed between your university and UVA if you don't have one already. And then you'd be able to play around with the system, test things out. So when researchers come to you and they might have questions, you can tell them exactly what it's like. And if you want to learn more, like I mentioned, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. My name is Will Rosenow. Again, I'm the Accord project manager, and my email is wr8yp@virginia.edu. And you're welcome to go to our website as well and check out any questions that you might have. Now, at this point, I'd love to just go ahead and stop the presentation and have some Q&A. See if y'all have any questions about Accord in general and open it up.
Hi, Will. This is Sherry Lake. I'm from the University of Virginia library on the academic side. I have two questions. How does a UVA researcher get access because they're already they're already home? So, so is that automatic?
That is a good question. Yes, I believe that, yes, since they are already part of UVA, There's no membership agreement required, and we can onboard users from UVA pretty much right away.
Okay, so the term is called onboarding. All right,
Yes.
and another question. I noticed that the three packages that are there now, of course, open source software. Any consideration about other non open source, like licensed MATLAB or something like that? What is the future of that on Accord?
Yes, that is a good question. And Tho and Ron might be able to answer this better, but to my knowledge, as of now, the licensing can be a little tricky based on who owns the license and whether or not you can bring your own license. So that is something I believe that we are in the midst of resolving. And it might be a case by case basis as of now until we get that resolved. But yes, MATLAB is a highly requested, platform that we are hoping to have up here pretty soon.
I can say that what we would love to do over time is take the major platforms that you're talking about, like Jupyter Notebooks and MATLAB, for example, get all those on, get the licensing all solved, so that if you have access to the computer, the license is included. It is complicated. Each company is different in the way they deal with their licensing, as I'm sure most of you know, and we're trying to work with them to get a way to make it simpler. And Tho has probably some more information up to date on that, but that's about what I can say.
Yeah, just a quick detail, which the complication comes from the fact, for example, COMSOL, which is one of the software that the folks in the physics community use. We can buy COMSOL licenses for our users, UVA users, but they wouldn't let UVA buy COMSOL and just make it available to the public, because that's just bad business for them, basically. And so but then they realize that Accord is new, and the model of what Accord is doing is where it's heading. And so we're working with them to, create new model for their licensing as well. And so it's the good thing is these guys recognize what we're trying to do and are supportive. So hopefully we'll be able to figure out these details soon.
Great. Thank you, though. Thank you, Ron. Ricky has his hand raised.
Hi, Will. I'm Ricky Patterson from the UVA Library. As you know, I just wanted to mention that I'm sticking it in the chat right now, that there is a LibGuide that we worked to create. Will and I. And I'm sticking the link in the chat right now. And we just want to stress that this is something that we would love for librarians at other institutions to feel free to reuse. It's a good way to advertise Accord locally, and modify it as you wish.
Great. Thank you, Ricky. Jen?
Hi, I'm Jen Huck. I'm the data librarian here at UVA Library. So for UVA researchers, what would be the motivating factor for them to use Accord compared to our regular HPC? Is it that they're collaborating with non-UVA researchers? Is that like the primary example of a UVA researcher who would want to use Accord over our regular HPC?
Yeah, so like over Ivy, you mean?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the primary motivation would probably, yes, be the collaborations. You would not have to sponsor accounts and bring people in through Ivy. It's a slightly different onboarding process. But yes, overall researchers at UVA will see a lot of similarities between the systems. But Ron and Tho might want to add more on that.
Thanks.
I would just say the core systems are the same systems, Jen.
Okay.
But it's different layers on top of it that give us the ability to make Accord available to outside parties. And that interface that you saw has been key to helping people understand better how to use it. And so our researchers can come into Ivy, the name of the hardware, and use command line if they want to, or they can come in using the interface that you just saw. And my bet is a lot of them will want to use that interface.
Okay, great. So the interface, right. It's easier to use if you're not already fluent in command line.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, great.
Yep.
Yeah, it's nice.
All All right, Andrea.
Yeah, I'm at UVA, but I'm going to pretend I'm not for a second. If I were at say, Virginia or North Carolina college, who typically is the signing authority for the membership agreement? Like, do I go to my provost or my IT people, or it's not me as an individual signing that, or is it?
It's a great question. No, it is not you as an individual. And I'm sure Tho can elaborate more on this, but yes, it needs to be someone from the higher up in the institution. Like, what's the right term for that, Tho? Who do you prefer signing them?
So the key to the membership agreement is essentially understanding that when it comes to research data, the university owns the data and not the researcher him or herself, right? Pretty much like everything related to university activities. And so when a user would like to use a cord, essentially he or she is going to put that data on a UVA system. And so at this point, we need a university level agreement between the two institutions to, it lays out the risk and the responsibilities and such. So anyone with signing authority for the university on behalf of the university, and usually either head of grants and contracts or director of OSP, someone like that. Which goes back to the point when Will brought up earlier, is that because that's the nature of the agreement, then we only need one per university partner, right? And so once we have an agreement between UVA and North Carolina, then any other researchers would just fall under that umbrella because we have figured that out. So the good thing is we don't have to do it every time.
Thank you, Tho. Nina, looks like you have your hand raised.
Hi, yes, I'm a research data librarian. I'm at Virginia Commonwealth. Of course, we also have our own cluster, including ones for HIPAA and other confidential data. So, well, not for HIPAA, you know what I mean, for health data. But I can see wanting to train teams or train postdocs or PhD students who then might go elsewhere and scale up what we might normally do a non-cloud-based RStudio or Python, except I don't do Python training, thank goodness. But to scale it up from one person at a time to talk to them about collaborative data analysis, but that would be putting a lot of students into a cord for the train. I mean, not a lot, but a certain number of students, and setting them up with accounts and having projects. And I can especially see that in departments that are kind of on the border of needing HPC and are trying to encourage some of their early career faculty to move over to HPC from crashing their laptops land. Do you have any thoughts on training, wider scale training, and putting training projects on Accord?
Yes, that is a key focus of Accord going forward. And we've had multiple conversations about that, primarily with involving training for students specifically, so they can get trained, they can go back to their lab, kind of showcase what the platform looks like and how it's able to be used, and then hopefully attract people that way. So here at UVA, we have these REUs where we're able to, pay the students. And so it's essentially like a part-time position, and they're able to go back to their university. I'll let Tho comment more about that in case that might be something that's possible for other universities as well.
We absolutely support exactly what you're talking about, Nina. Essentially, Accord is relatively new to the community, so we're building up our programs. But as Will mentioned, training, and we're actually looking for partners to do these things as well, right? And so this is, by the way, if this is of interest to you particularly, we would love to have follow-up conversations on how we can create these programs to train early career researchers, because it's in addition to practical computing services that we're delivering to the community, is really the knowledge and the best practices that we're figuring out in doing this that we think is that we believe is also as important. And so in training these researchers, understanding about data security and compliance, they're obviously not the same thing, but and best practices and all these things. And so yes, the short answer is we absolutely support that. That is one of our goals, and we would love to follow up with you or anyone else who's interested to develop these programs.
Yeah.
Well, if I could jump in as well.
Yeah, go ahead,
I mean,
Ron.
So one of the things we're trying to solve with the cord is this chicken and egg problem. We've got many smaller universities who don't have the computing resources, and they don't have a lot of researchers who'll do this because they don't have the computing resources. They have researchers who may want to do this, but then they don't know how. And so we have this chicken and egg problem. If we can make resources available and people can say, oh, I can go after that grant, or I can do this research to prepare for going after a grant, and then we can help them with that, it's awesome. And then over time, they can grow that at their university. Now, this is key why you guys are here. Not all schools have technologists who can support research computing, but I would venture all schools have libraries and have librarians who are good at doing research in many senses of the word. And so if we can bring partners from libraries in to help us in the smaller schools that don't have that support function, I think that will help us break this vicious chicken and egg cycle. And so you guys are key in my eyes to helping us to get this further into the smaller schools. I hope that makes sense.
Well, and I see several people here that I know are part-time data librarians. They do data and they do something else, and are at places that I suspect don't have HPC. But I bet we could get a group of us together to maybe arrange some training, some remote training. Now that everyone knows how to do remote, that could leverage a lot of our different abilities and help expand sort of programming level work with secure data.
That'd be awesome.
That'd be
Some
great.
of you know who I'm talking about.
And like I mentioned, feel free to email me, especially about the REUs and things like that. We're happy to get that ball rolling. Any other questions? Feel free to just unmute yourself if you do.
Yeah, I'll talk and speak up. John Peters from Virginia Tech. I just was looking around on the core website, so I haven't found the list of current members. Is there a list of current members available, or is that in the development?
Yeah, that is, we do have a list of current members you mean like who've signed membership agreements?
Yes.
Yes. Tho, do you have the current list?
Yeah, well, the good news is most universities in the state of Virginia, public universities, have already signed, definitely Virginia Tech. You're correct. We probably should make that list available so you can easily find them. We have a couple universities outside of Virginia as well. We'll make that available.
Yeah, I'll send that out with the email and the follow-up, and we will be putting that on our website.
Okay. And quick second question: is it possible to see a copy of these membership agreements? I'd be very interested to see how issues like liability are addressed.
Yeah,
I would too.
Yes, absolutely. The membership agreement is we actually probably should even make it so that you can download and look at it too. It's probably one of the key things that were more difficult than we thought it would be. Essentially, essentially, for example, if you're putting data on our system, who's responsible for what, right? And then when things does go wrong, who's on the hook or what, and those kind of things are spelled out in the agreement, and we'll share it, and it's one of the more requested artifacts that come out of this project.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Well, I don't want to keep you here too long if you don't have any additional questions. That's all we had for the quick presentation and a Q&A. Like I mentioned, I will be following up with the LibGuide in case you want to use that with a post of the recording. And any other questions you might have, feel free to shoot them my way, and I'm happy to answer them. And thank you all for attending.